Warning: the following episode contains elements of horror that may be unsuitable for listeners under the age of 13. Listener discretion is advised. Hello. We've been expecting you. I'm Brianna, and welcome to Beyond the Bazaar's 13 Nights of Frights. From October 19th through October 31st, Halloween night, we will be sharing with you some of our favorite hand-picked urban legends, lore, stories, and more that we love to talk about during this special time of year. So take a seat, make yourself comfortable for these 13 nights of terror. Hey everybody, welcome back to Beyond the Bazaar. I'm Brianna, and this is the final night, the 13th night of our 13 Nights of Frights. And it's also Halloween. Woo, yay! We are super excited to share with you guys tonight's topic, which is trick-or-treating. We were feeling a little bit nostalgic, so we thought we would share that with you guys and make that tonight's topic. So we'll get into the history of that and as well as share some dark aspects of trick-or-treating as well and our thoughts on that. Before I get into it, I just want to say that this year has gone by so fast. Like, I cannot believe that today is October 31st already, and it's just gone by so fast. It's like a blink of an eye, I guess, with the quarantine and social distancing and all of that jazz. It's just caused the years to just fly by. I was actually stating earlier that I'm not I'm not counting this year. So when I next year my birthday, I'm not counting this year. I'm not. I'm not. So I'm going to be the same age for 2 years in a row. But anyway, it has gone by really fast, and also doing this podcast really helped pass time by during quarantine and kind of helped us keep our sanity here, just having something to be productive in and putting our energy into something and not being stressed and ease anxiety and things of that nature. And I hope that listening to our podcast and joining us each week helped you guys as well, help pass time by and helped ease your mind just as it did with us. Now, as I said yesterday, today is not only the last episode of our 13 Nights of Frights, but also the last episode of our season one of our podcast, Beyond the Bazaar. And we do fully anticipate and plan on coming back in 2021. So stay tuned for an announcement on our premiere date for season two. We're also going to be doing a special holiday episode sometime in December, and we'll announce that at a later date as well. So just be on the lookout for that on our Instagram, Facebook page, and our website. We'll be announcing that soon. So, running it back to right now, to this topic tonight, our topic is trick or treating. Let's get into it. So, the custom of trick or treating was established by American popular culture back in the 1950s when the Peanuts Gang comic strip featured it, which, if you're not familiar with Peanuts, it's Charlie Brown, Snoopy, Woodstock, all of that. That the act of trick or treating was depicted in the Peanuts comic strips, and in 1952, Disney created a cartoon of Donald Duck and his nephews trick or treating. I love Donald Duck and his little nephews. I remember watching like little videos that would make me smile. I'm sorry. So it kind of gained popularity just through popular culture there, but trick or treating does date back way, way before the 1950s in America. During the Celtic celebration, which is the precursor of Halloween, villagers would disguise themselves in costumes made of animal hides to drive away phantom visitors. And they would have tables, banquets filled with food, and they would leave the food out to placate unwelcome spirits. So Halloween is just kind of like, just keeping those evil spirits at bay, kind of like with the jack-o'-lanterns that we discussed yesterday, how those are meant to keep away evil spirits and unwelcome guests as well. But the real precursor of trick-or-treating came along during the Middle Ages, when people practiced mumming. So mumming was the act of dressing up as a ghost, demon, or any other evil creatures and performed antics in exchange for food or drink. So now how kids dress up for candy, dress up to get candy, going door to door to get candy. They dressed up as ghosts and demons in exchange for a little food and a little drink. Soon after that, Christianity kind of took over and blended in with the pagan rituals. And then the Christian church created All Souls Day, which is on November 2nd. So during this time, the poor people would visit the homes of wealthy people and receive pastries known as soul cakes in exchange for a prayer. This process was known as souling. Later, children would go door to door asking for gifts, food, money, or ale. So it's kind of just like all that's deriving just from different traditions molding and combining over time. And we've seen that a lot in our 13 Nights of Frights, just how history and tradition can just be passed along and be changed or shifted slightly, but still kind of remains true to the original. In Scotland and Ireland during this time, the youth would go guising, which is showing up in a costume and asking for a treat. In exchange for this treat, they would perform a trick. So they would tell a joke, recite a poem, or just do something silly. And the treats they would usually get would be money, fruits, or some type of nut. So that's kind of where trick or treat comes. I'm not gonna say that's kind of where I'm probably 100% sure that's where trick or treat comes from. So once again, just those old customs just remaining true and going through centuries of time and still being around today. It's really cool how holding on to history and tradition, it can just travel through time and never be lost. So during the 19th century, American colonists and Irish immigrants fleeing the Irish potato famine in 1840s brought trick-or-treating to America. So way before Snoopy, Woodstock, and Charlie Brown, Linus, and all the Peanuts gangs hit the comic strips and Donald Duck and his nephews hit the airwaves, trick-or-treating had hit America long before that. In the early 20th century, Irish and Scottish communities revived the old world traditions of souling and guising. By the 1920s, playing pranks became a favorite activity of rowdy young teenagers. During the Great Depression, Halloween mischief devolved into vandalism, actual physical assault, and acts of violence. So it looks like around that time, due to everything that was going on during the time of the Great Depression, it kind of took a negative turn and it kind of turned into a bit of mischief, vandalism, violence, assault. It just kind of took a dark turn there, as common with things that we've seen, like with Black Cats, how it started off positive and eventually turned negative. I guess it's just a thing where such things happen, especially during times of peril, such as the Great Depression. It's actually common even till today that crime rates climb in many cities around Halloween. Police really have to step up the defenses on Halloween to defend against pranks, vandalism, assault, things of that nature. And the sad thing is, especially on Halloween, if something's really happening to someone, a lot of people may not acknowledge it or believe it because they think it's just some type of prank. Like, I know most of you have probably seen Halloween, the original Halloween with Jamie Lee Curtis. And when she discovers that Michael Myers is pretty much walking around killing people, she goes from door to door, yelling for the neighbors to help her, and they look out their window and turn off all their lights, pretty much just assuming that she's just making mischief when she actually is in need of help. So when I was doing research, that's the first thing that popped into my head, because I remember when I first saw the movie when I was young, thinking that was just very odd that no one helped her. But when I got older, I said, okay, well now I see why. They probably thought that nothing was really wrong and she was just trying to play a prank or be funny. But in cases like that, it was very real. In the movie, at least, anyway. So all of this mayhem and mischief actually led to Mischief Night, also known as Devil's Night, which is the night before Halloween, where there's a strong tradition of vandalism and pranks. On Mischief Night, it usually results in destruction and arson. So if Devil's Night sounds familiar to you guys, American Horror Story Hotel actually had an episode that's themed around Devil's Night, where Evan Peters' character, James Patrick March, actually had the ghosts of, I don't want to say popular, but well-known serial killers like Eileen Wuornos and Jeffrey Dahmer, just the popular, well-known serial killers there. So that, if it sounds familiar, that's probably where you've heard it. Devil's Night was also mentioned in the movie The Crow as well. So it's been ingrained into popular culture for more recent generations to kind of know what it is, and it's still something that does go on today, that is still acknowledged and celebrated right to this very day, Mischief Night and Devil's Night. And aside from the mischief and mayhem of Devil's Night, the destruction of Mischief Night and all of that, there is also a darker side of trick-or-treating and Halloween in itself, and that is the possibility of candy being poisoned or laced. Now, that's something that we've all were told growing up, or that we all tell our kids now, about trick-or-treating or getting candy from strangers. Because after all, like, most of the time, any other day during the year, where we discourage our kids, or we were discouraged as kids, to not take candy from strangers, but on Halloween, it's encouraged to do so. So this kind of raises heights of security, but also it kind of leaves you defenseless, because you're wanting to be trusting to get those treats, but at the same time, people's motives aren't always so pure. With cases of candies being poisoned, there's been cases of arsenic, rat poisoning being used in candies, and razor blades and apples. Razor blades and apples is one that I always heard growing up. I never personally had an experience, because all the kids knew not to take apples from anyone, and we just never really did it. And plus, I grew up in a household where our parents would actually check our candy. I wasn't really allowed to eat any candy that would wrap back up, so Tootsie Rolls were always my favorite, and Tootsie Rolls gets a lot of hate, but they were my favorite candy growing up. I love Tootsie Rolls, but my mom, she would never let me really eat the ones that kind of unrolled. It can be rolled back, or she would examine it closely to make sure that it wasn't rolled back up, because like, it's probably been tampered with. Most of the time I was only able to eat candy that couldn't really be, you could tell if it's been open or it just wasn't able to be tampered with in that nature. So I kind of missed out on a lot of good candy, but I digress. But during my research here about candy being laced, I actually came across a really, really insane case. It's actually a case about the man who, quote, killed Halloween. And it was really, really upsetting, but it was so interesting at the same time. I wanted to share it with you guys. So it took place in Pasadena, Texas in the 1970s. There was an 8-year-old boy by the name of Timothy O'Brien, who had a 5-year-old sister by the name of Elizabeth, and they went trick-or-treating with some of their friends, and their father, Ronald O'Brien, was the chaperone. So they went trick-or-treating as they normally did every year, getting candy from all the neighbors. Once they got home, their father, Ronald, told his children that they could choose one piece of candy to eat now, and they had to put the rest away. So Timothy chose the pixie stick. Unfortunately, he didn't know that the pixie stick was laced with potassium cyanide. After ingesting it, he was rushed to the hospital, but he ended up dying before any doctors could actually help him. So when all this happened, of course, hysterics break out. The friends that were with them, parents start checking their candy. They find out that there were pixie sticks also that were laced with potassium cyanide in their kids' candy baskets. The parents checked 5-year-old Elizabeth's basket, found pixie sticks that was also laced in hers. So now they're in hysterics trying to figure out who could have done this, what neighbor did this, and they were pointing all the fingers at the neighbors. But unfortunately, the terror did live a little bit closer to home. Turns out Ronald gave his son the poison candy to collect the $20,000 worth of life insurance he had taken out on him earlier in the year. Upon further investigation by FBI, they had found out that he had taken an additional $20,000 out on his son Timothy, as well as his daughter. So that's $40,000 for each child that he had taken out. Thankfully, the Elizabeth and the other three children, did not eat the candy because they were too young. They couldn't get the staples out. This is back before pixie sticks were like the rippable paper that they are now. They were actually the plastic tube with these staples on top. You may be able to see those still in some stores. They still have the old-fashioned kind, but that's the kind that it was. And per our research, the way that Ronald was able to get the potassium cyanide in it was that he was able to remove the staples and pour it in there. Yes, he had taken out the additional 20,000 on top of the 20,000 he had taken for each child. He took that second 20,000 out around a month before Halloween. So when the life insurance company started looking into that pattern and the FBI started connecting the dots, that's when they knew that Ronald was the culprit. So after connecting all of these dots, on November 5th of 1974, Ronald O'Brien was arrested on the charge of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder for his daughter and the other 3 kids. 6 months later, Ronald was put to trial and was convicted. He was sentenced to death on October 31st of 1976, but Ronald did maintain his innocence. He offered to take a lie detector polygraph test. He filed many of appeals, but none of them were successful, and he was eventually executed by lethal injection on March 31st of 1984 for the murder of his son, the 4 counts of attempted murder of the other children. So when I initially read up on this case, I was floored for some fact that he would take out life insurance on his kids just to get himself out of debt. Like, I understand debt is a bad thing, but to do that, and not only that, like, you were so adamant about getting away with it that you would also put the lives of other people's children in danger or kill them without any regard. It was just very dark. And even though he said that he was innocent, it just, there was too much evidence against him. The life insurance, for one thing. Then also a fact that I forgot to mention beforehand, he was going from different vendors trying to get potassium cyanide, and there was record of that. So it was just so much against him that, there was no other person who had that evidence against them that could have done it. But it was unfortunate, that that type of thing happened, and it does kind of bring a darkness, but also heightens the awareness of things like that that could happen, that could be closer to home than you think. And there are other horror stories centered on Halloween and trick or treating, not as, I'm not gonna say not as bad, but not as detailed and graphic and true crime esque like what happened with Timothy O'Brien. But in Pasadena, California, there was a there were a group of boys that were walking, down the street trick or treating, and they came across another group of young boys who opened fire on them because the boy had a blue bandana hanging out of his pocket. So the other group of boys were actually members of the gang, the Bloods, and they assumed from the blue bandana that the other group of boys were affiliated with the Crips. So they killed them, but they, of course, weren't who they thought they were. So it just kind of alludes to you got to be careful even with costume choices. And I remember a friend actually telling me that, and I wanted to share that here that they had heard that had happened in Pasadena, California. And the first thing I was like, well, Pasadena, California, Pasadena, Texas. Pasadena is just bad things are happening in those cities. But that did kind of remind me of a story that I was told when I was young and by my grandmother. And it still stays just sticks with me to this day, and that's why I said like costume choices. I'm not gonna say it matters so much now, but back then, I remember when my cousin was younger and um, he wanted to wear like an army suit when we were kids, and my aunt went out and got it and everything. I showed it to my grandmother, and my grandmother was like, "Don't let him wear that because he's going to get killed." So we're looking at, we're going like, okay, and she told us the story of this young boy who was dressed up. He was a boy of Asian descent, and he was dressed up just as in standard army attire. Well, he had been seen by an army veteran and he was killed because I guess he had flashbacks to when he was in the Vietnam War. So my grandma heard that she didn't want us dressing up as army men, she didn't want us dressing up as policemen, she didn't want us dressing up as anything of that nature. And back then, I was like, Grandma, okay, that's yeah, I understand that story. It's devastating, especially hearing something like that happening to a child. I tried to find some research on it. I wasn't able to, but my grandma said it was told to her, so I don't know. But I thought it was worth sharing it because it kind of connects to what happened in Pasadena, California. But it kind of goes to show that you just have to kind of put thought in it because the world that we live in, you just got to things you wouldn't think you have to think of. You sometimes just do have to kind of take it into regard. Don't take it with a grain of salt. Just kind of put thought into it because you just really never know. Kind of like how, like a long time ago. Not gonna say a long time ago. It hasn't been that long. Like I want to say like around 5 years ago, how people would dress up as Native Americans who weren't native, or would wear Indian headdresses and they weren't of Native American descent. How that kind of thing, wasn't really, I'm not gonna say a big deal because it definitely was, but it just wasn't really taken into regard like it is now. It just thought wasn't put into it. So sometimes even though you may feel like you shouldn't put thought into things, I think that sometimes you just have to think a little bit deeper into things and think about how or what could happen because sometimes you could just be literally like those boys walking down the street trick or treating and wearing just a simple costume, and the next you may be laying in a morgue somewhere. That sounds so dark. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Someone come get me. I'm sorry. But outside of the darkness of trick or treating, there are many positive things on it, especially now during this COVID-19 time. There's been a surgence of people having Halloween parties at home, making goodie bags for their children, having like little party platters. I actually saw on Pinterest where people are making like Halloween candy platters, things for them to do with their kids. And in a way, I feel that it's safer. Because I always said I don't have any children right now, but I always said that when I do have kids, I'm never probably gonna let them go trick or treating, even though I had the joy of doing that. But I feel like, especially now with our world, we're moving into a place where it's not going to really get any better, in my opinion. So I just feel like, it's safer just for kids to be at home. And it may just even be more fun. You can still let them dress up, just, get all their favorite candy and just call it a night and just have fun and share those moments with them all the same. Well, I'm not going to go too far in a rant, but this has been our last episode of our 13 Nights of Frights Beyond the Bazaar, and also the last episode of our season one. Once again, I know I've said this to you guys a lot of times already, but I want to thank you guys for listening with us and giving us your support every week and every day during this 13 Nights of Frights. We really do appreciate it. And we will be back in 2021 with new episodes every Tuesday. So come back for that. And we're not going to leave you guys hanging. We will be back with a special holiday episode sometime in December, and we will make an announcement about that to remind you guys. So don't worry, we'll be on that. So, once again, you guys, thank you guys for everything. We really appreciate it. And this has been Brianna with Beyond the Bizarre, 13 Nights of Frights, and see you guys soon. But until then, you guys already know, as always, stay bizarre.